Hello, and welcome back to Blonde
Brunette
and Confused, the podcast where we share stories, unsolicited advice, and conversations about life as college students. We want to give you the unfiltered truth.
Today, we are joined by a very, very special guest, entrepreneur and girl boss Alexa Curtis. I don't think you all understand. She's literally done so much that we had to pick and choose our favorite things to highlight. But she started her blog, Life Unfiltered with Alexa, when she was only 12 years old. And now she manages a whole array of amazing projects to help inspire young adults to be fearless and unfiltered. She has a nonprofit called Media Impact and Navigation for Teens. She created and organizes the Be Fearless Summit. She has a show on Radio Disney and so much more. So Alexa, I'll hand it over to you if you want to introduce yourself.
Oh my God, you guys did such a good intro. I don't need any more introducing. I mean, thank you so much for having me. But I don't know. You guys said it better than I did.
We stalked you on the internet?
I guess you did.
I'm on LinkedIn.
Fabulous. I mean, you guys knew everything, and you said it like even better than I would say it. So
we did our research. I'm so proud of us.
Amazing. Well, sometimes people will be like Alexis Curtis or like Alex Curtis, and I'm like, all you have to do is just Google the name or like something really easy. So you guys are already brownie points.
I'm so glad. On top of that, do you want to talk a little bit about how you got started where you were, especially because you were so young? How did you get where you are today? What was that journey like for you?
Yeah, so I started a fashion blog back in 2011 called A Life in the Fashion Lane. I'm from a really small town in Eastern Connecticut, never fit in. It's pretty severely bullied growing up and had no money, no connections. And so I launched this blog way before the days of blogging was a thing. And when I was 14, I made this pitch and I started emailing all these different companies, got myself invited to Fashion Week. I think everyone just felt really bad for me. I was this like 14-year-old girl from the middle of nowhere. And I used to write all these emails. And then when I was 16, at the time I was actually failing out of high school because I was just not good at school. I was still planning to go to college because I never thought I could make a career out of this. And I had emailed somebody at Rachel Ray. And the day that I forced my mom to let me transfer to online school, got a call from somebody at Rachel Ray and they wanted me to go on the show. So the next week I went down to New York as this like 16-year-old girl, didn't know anything, but initially I loved fashion. And then over the past 10 years, now I'm 22, I run the site full time, but it's on social media and mental health. I launched the summit, the nonprofit, and then my one big yes was the show on Radio Disney, which actually recently wrapped, but was on air for a year.
That's amazing. I just want to know, I think we all want to know, what are some like good tips that you have for like good content?
Yeah.
Because we definitely are just getting started. We've only done this for like a little less than a year.
You know what? Don't be afraid to get out there. Like email people all the time. I think that by only focusing on social media, you limit yourself. So as a podcast, you have the opportunity to meet so many incredible people, to interview so many amazing people. And so let that be the driving force. I think that social media is a great tool, but I also think that with it comes a lot of different negativity and a lot of body image issues, depression, anxiety. So especially with a podcast, I think your voice is so much more important than a picture, and maybe even a website kind of be the driving force, and then social media itself will just naturally take off as the podcast continues to be successful.
So we were wondering where you get the inspiration for all of these projects you've done, because you've clearly come up with a lot of different things and written a lot of pitches. So kind of just what drives you and inspires you?
That's a great question. I will say that being an entrepreneur, you have this like inner innate just drive. And I think that you can find that drive, but you really have to find your purpose. So for me, I constantly have a lot of ideas, but I know myself. Like if I get up and continue to pursue the idea, like especially when I launched this summit and it just like was in my mind and I just couldn't stop emailing even with all the rejection, then I know it's like, I call it the money idea. But if I have an idea for like a show or something and I just like, I don't find myself emailing a bunch of people, like it's not taking priority, then I know this isn't the idea. But like, even for example, I had this show to do this mini digital series called Founder Files. I had the idea maybe 6 months ago and I wrote up a whole one sheet on it and then nothing happened. And then the other day I just like, I had always been thinking about it, but I just never pursued it. And then I found this company, emailed her and got the show sponsored and we go into production on Monday. So sometimes a lot of times like the show or ideas will come back around, but it's all on timing. It's all timing.
Going off of that, one of the biggest things about going after those ideas and something that you really preach is the idea of being fearless, your Fearless Fridays. The one thing we really loved was on your Instagram when you're like, I saw a bag that I wanted, so I wrote up the pitch, and and I got it. And it's that drive to just know what you want and go after it that so many young people are still trying to build. Do you have any advice for kind of going after what you want and not being afraid of that rejection?
Yeah, I get asked that a lot. And the biggest thing I say is like, what makes you so afraid? And every time I ask somebody, they're like, I don't know, it's just scary. And I'm like, okay, but like if you can actually look at what makes you scary, is it the rejection? Because you're rejected, we're all rejected. Like you're rejected if you're dating, you're rejected if your teacher hates your assignment, right? It's no different. It's easier if you're sending an email out because you're getting rejected behind a screen. You know, when I tell people about the pitching and stuff, the internet, it's all fake. Like, you never know if, you know, I don't know if that bag was fake. It could have been like a sweatshop in India. Like, it wasn't. But, you know, so if they were going to reply to my email and be like, no, what do I care? They said yes, but I get said no to all the time. And it's on the internet. Nobody's meeting you face to face. So if you can tackle what makes you actually so scared, you'll probably realize that you have no reason. You're just scared. So just write the first email or contact the first person, and it gets so much easier from there.
That's what my mom always says. She always goes, Bella, literally, what's the worst that could happen? And it's never anything dramatic. It's just someone's going to say no, and then you keep going.
We love female entrepreneur Allison Burkhart.
Oh, yes. My mom, so she recently retired from her really long corporate career, like 37 plus years. And now she's just living her best life doing interior design. She's just having a ball. And another thing is you're super young, but also it's never too late to become an entrepreneur. So it's amazing.
Never too late. You know, some people have that $1 million idea at 45. It's really never too late. It's never too early. So
yeah, and age is never a factor. You're never too young. You're never too old. A good idea is a good idea.
Yeah, it's never something that you should focus on ever.
Unless you can't talk yet, that might be hard.
Yeah.
So you're really open in the things you create about just your life and different truths and hard truths about it and being unfiltered. What do you have for advice for other people to kind of figure out how to do that? Because it is a hard thing to just start doing.
Yeah. I would say that there's a difference too between being authentic and being unfiltered, and I think I've been able to figure out how to do both. But I would say that I don't necessarily think that you should be unfiltered unless that is your brand. I've had many times where I've realized that I've said way too much online, or I've just overshared something, and I've learned that the hard way. And so I don't necessarily like preach that, but I think that if you're a genuinely authentic person, then you really can use the internet to create your own community, and then from there maybe gain traction and a following, like I did when I started the blog. And I had made all these friends because I had no friends that were all like teen bloggers. But I would say that you're either willing to share your life or you're not, and I don't suggest people do that unless they are really like passionate about it.
That's one of our biggest things that we try to do here is we try and talk about topics that a lot of people wouldn't. And a question that I personally get when I tell people about this podcast, it's like, oh, wow, you actually shared real experiences about your first time going to a party or, your relationships. And a lot of people aren't comfortable with that. But I think you may agree in the fact that when we share our authentic experiences, people feel less alone.
Yes.
And I feel less alone in the process. Just having someone tell me like, oh, I didn't know anybody else felt that way.
Yeah.
1,000%. And that's why you do it, is because it makes you feel better. But in return, you help somebody else. And that's what it comes down to.
So our podcast being based off of college students and like really delving into the opinion of college students and everything, how did you know it was the right choice to not go to college?
I knew when I didn't get into any colleges. When you're dating and it's like when nobody replies to your text, you just know that they're not the right person. Yeah, no, I applied to 3. I didn't get into them. And so from there I had started making money, and then I just, became so like enthralled by writing and blogging and going to events and fashion week and stuff. And so I just moved to New York. I found a really cheap apartment. I had been making money from the site, and then it just never really crossed my mind again. But I get asked all the time, like, when are you going to college? Or are you thinking about it? And I'm like, no, but I don't think that you shouldn't think about it just because I didn't go. Maybe if I had gone in, then I wouldn't be here today. So I don't know. It all happens for a reason.
That's
At the
true.
moment, you're definitely doing well where you are. So
Yeah.
it makes sense to go to college.
Yeah. But I also think like there's many people, Carly Kloss went to college, Gigi Hadid went to college. I'm pretty sure they all dropped out, but like they all went to college while running their companies because they wanted to learn something new. So maybe I would go and learn law in like 10 years, but just not right now.
whether or not, inside, outside of college, wherever you are in any stage of your life, one of the biggest things that I personally have encountered, and I think everybody has, we just don't talk about it enough, is the idea of imposter syndrome. The idea that wherever you are in life, it's not because of whatever skills you have or your intelligence. It's just kind of luck. You think you're not worthy. I deal with this every day in the classroom, with jobs, in friend groups, and I think a lot of people do. We just don't talk about it. So I was wondering if you've had any experience with that. And how do you deal with that?
I'm sad that you've had that experience because I feel like you're so young. I feel like I don't meet a lot of people who have imposter syndrome until they're older, but I talked a lot on my podcast about that. I think it goes back to that message of your authenticity. And so therefore, I think that the more success you find, for me, that's when I've had that. And I've gone into like deep therapy over it because I just have never been somebody who like looks at myself and is like, oh my God, I'm doing so great. And I think that's what makes me successful is because I'm like, this is never enough. This is never enough. Maybe until I'm actually at the place where, I would think that it was enough. But I think that therapy has really helped me deal with that because you need somebody who's like in your corner, who's unbiased, who can look at you and be like, you need to sit down with a notebook and like write down what you've done. Even if it's like, I got a good grade on a test or like, somebody replied to my message, like whatever it is. And I think that will really help you get over it. But it's a long process. But I think it really just comes also with self-acceptance.
I think another thing about why it might start affecting us when we're younger is the fact that social media, you have so much more coming at you constantly to compare yourself to, which is a really dangerous game to play because it can serve as inspiration if you use it properly and find the right people, but it can also serve as a constant reminder of what you think you should be. And I know that's a really big focus for you. Our generation can use social media responsibly. And I don't know if there's anything you want to say on that, any tips you have, because whether we like it or not, we're surrounded by it.
That's a great point, and that's why I say to not like look at social media as your only option or to only have a career based off of social media, because that syndrome is so common, you're right, with young people because we're all comparing ourselves. I am, you are, we all are, and it's inevitable. So I would say when it comes to social media, like I started taking social media off every Sunday and it just changed my life. And I literally delete every app off of my phone and I re-download them on Monday morning. And then I would also say, like, if you have somebody that you follow and it's like a friend or a family member and you feel insecure or bad when you view their posts, just mute them. You don't have to unfollow them. But if you're also following somebody that we all know that there's that person that we're like, this is like unhealthy, that I'm like obsessed with how beautiful you are. Don't follow them, like unfollow them. It's hurting nobody's feelings. And you'll just realize that your mental health is so much better.
Related to imposter syndrome, our generation has had so much to balance, and we definitely in college, we burn out a lot. What tips do you have to like really take the time to like relax and not stress so much?
Yes, great question. I always say to myself, will this matter in 5 years? And I said it to my friend the other day who's starting a company or has started one. He said, yeah, well, the company's successful. That's going to matter in 5 years. And I was like, no, will this one phone call, this one test, will that matter? Because the world is going to do whatever it wants to do anyway. Like you're going to fail or be successful because it's the world that chooses this crap. And it is how hard you work. But a lot of companies fail in their first year, especially startups. It doesn't necessarily have to do with work ethic. It just has to do with life and stuff. So I would say that if you can think about it like that, will this matter? And also if you find yourself getting exhausted, if you find yourself feeling really unsatisfied, then you need to force yourself to take a step back because you are no use to anyone in any capacity, even friends or family, if you are unhappy. And if there's something making you unhappy, a lot of times too, people will get burnout and they didn't even realize it was like a negative friend relationship or a negative relationship. Get that person out of your life and just take a few days to yourself. Everyone has 48 hours to just sit alone or, don't go into class. Like your professor isn't going to hate you. You're only human.
One of your more recent seeming projects and one that we find just extremely impressive is the Be Fearless Summit. So we wanted to know more about your inspiration for why you started it and sort of just where you're going with it.
Yeah.
If you have future changes and plans.
I'm so glad you brought it up. Yeah. So I had this idea, and that's when I say that like money idea. I always get asked to speak at colleges and I'm paid to speak at colleges. And I had this idea after speaking at all these different colleges. And people come up to me. It's always a similar thread. How do I use social media to grow my company? Or like, I want to start a company or I want to like hustle, quote unquote hustle, but I don't know how. And so I was like, why don't I start my own project? So I had this idea in March of 2018 and I had the idea and I made like a little one sheet on it, which is like a sheet that has all your ideas. And then I sent it out to like hundreds of colleges and got not one reply. Maybe I think I got one no actually from NYU, which was my first college rejection. And then finally, I waited a little bit of time and I ended up speaking at a conference and meeting somebody from Drexel, which was the first university. And I pitched it to her like right on the spot. And they, within like 2 weeks, said yes to it. Then I hosted the first one this year in March at Drexel. And then for 6 months, pitched it out religiously, just all consistently every day. No. Or I would have phone calls all the time throughout the summer. I was in Europe, like anywhere I would take a phone call. Always no. And then 2 weeks ago, I finally got my second yes from Berkeley. It's April 1st, 2020 at Berkeley, which is great. But I mean, it just goes to show, and you don't see on social media. And I have pictures of the emails every day for months. I just never gave up on it. But the goal would be to do like 5 or 6 with colleges and maybe 5 or 6 on my own and then sell it. I love it, but it's a lot of work. So I would like to eventually like have it be a little bit bigger than me and give it to somebody else to take the reins on it.
Any listeners in the California area, we see you. You best be there. So much to learn.
Yes, April 1st.
Yeah, so I mean, you're such a young business owner. You must have had some kind of crazy experiences. Do you have any that come to mind? We love
That you
sharing
can
stories.
share, yeah.
We love sharing stories. So if you have any, I can't imagine the amount of things you've experienced that have been thrown your way.
So many. One in particular I remember, which actually when I signed with my management company, which is based in LA, they actually started developing this show that was based on my life and we pitched it out. And that kind of went on hold for a while because the writer got staffed on this show Sirens. But the opening episode of this show, so when I was 16 and I first appeared on Rachel Ray, I didn't know at the time that you had to return the clothing. So they paid me to go on the show. It was this brand, I'm not going to name names, and I had no clue that you had to return the clothing. So I'm just like wearing the clothing. I gave the clothing to my sister. Like everyone had this clothing. And then about like a week after the shoot, I get an email being like, "Hey, where's the clothing?" And I was 16. I'm like, "What?" And I had illegally signed a contract. I never disclosed my age, and your contract is not void if you're under 18. Anyhow, like lawyers were involved. They tried to sue me. I had to send this thing called a cease and desist letter. I have no one in my family who's an entrepreneur, but I have one uncle who's like a tax accountant in Texas, and he like helped me file all the paperwork. It was quite traumatizing. And so that happened early on. And I've had the most bizarre things happen, like encounters with celebrities, a lot of just crazy people, cars, flights. I should one day write a list on it. There's a lot of them, and that was one of the more negative ones, but I learned a lot from that experience.
And at just 16, like
I was really young.
I would just be crying.
Yeah,
I was
you
young,
do.
And I remember that there's this industry Facebook page, and I remember at the time I was doing social media for this girl, and I was in an airport, and she sent me a screenshot, and this evil woman that was like the founder of this company had written a long post about me in this Facebook group, just so mean. And I'm 16. I remember it so. I think I was in Houston, and I remember I was in the thing, and I sat in the floor of the airport just crying, and I'm alone, and I'm just crying, and I'm calling my mom, and my mom's like, my mom's a nurse. She's like, I have no clue what are you talking about? My career's over, so I had to like contact Facebook, and they had to take down the post. But yeah, that's just one of many.
Yeah, being so young, you must have had to grow up so much more
fast,
quickly. Yeah. Why do certain adults have it out for
They
people just
obviously
living
didn't
their
know
lives? Yeah.
my age, but also a lot of people in entertainment, like the longer you work in entertainment, nobody's nice. Everyone's just really mean. It's just not a nice industry to be in. Yeah, prepare yourself. It's like high school.
Was the transition from East to West Coast difficult, especially to LA? I'm from Washington State, so West to East, there were definitely some changes, but it's crazy to think about going from a super small town on the East Coast to LA on the West Coast.
Can I add on to that? Do you feel like it kind of changed you when you went there? Because I know my sister moved to outside of San Francisco and came back a hippie.
Yes, I've heard a lot of people that say that about San Francisco. To bring you guys back, so I moved out when I was like 17, and I went to New York, like full-on starting artist, had no money. And then I went to Boston for 2 years. And then I forced my now ex-best friend to move to LA with me, like a childhood friend, for 3 months. And at the same time, I had pitched and landed the show on Radio Disney. So in January of like 2 years ago, my friend didn't come back. He came back to Connecticut, and I decided to stay out there. I had also been in a relationship for 2 years and then moved out there, and we broke up, then got back together, then broke up again. And so it was a little, actually, when I look back, traumatizing to move somewhere like LA, especially on your own, because it is a completely different ballpark, and especially in entertainment. Now that I've been there for like 2.5 years, I have my own group of friends and stuff, but for that first year, I felt so alone. more alone than I felt in any city, and I've lived in like 5. And now I feel like I've changed, but in like just a growth way. And also like my career really excelled when I moved to LA. So yeah, I would say it was a positive experience for me, but I don't love LA. I actually hate LA, but I live there.
I feel like so many people, when they make giant moves like that, they're not willing to admit if they don't mesh immediately. In college, it's hard to admit when you don't make friends right away, and it takes people forever, and nobody talks about it. It's like you don't make friends instantly, and everybody's just like, oh yeah, I'm having a great first semester. But in reality, we're all struggling to find our place, and people need to be more open about that.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Everyone's always struggling, even if they figured it out, they're still struggling. In other ways.
As we're wrapping up, so sadly, do you want to share any like upcoming exciting things that you have going, that you're doing, that you want our listeners to know about?
Yeah, so my podcast airs every Wednesday. That's called This Is Life Unfiltered, and I'm almost at episode 100. I don't know when this airs, but it will probably be there, which is episode 100 is the editor-in-chief of Harper's Bazaar. From there, then the summit is April 1st, so those, like, even if I do one a year, that takes up all of my time. And then I'm also working, so my Radio Disney show is on the air for a year, and it wrapped in September. And so now I've pitched that out to a lot of other networks. So the goal is that it would become a digital show met with a lot of different networks. So hopefully somebody will pick it up. So that would be, TV show next year. So yeah.
Seriously, y'all, all of the things that we've just touched on here, Alexa actually really breaks down in her podcast. So things like imposter syndrome, there's a whole episode, burnout, knowing when it's okay to not be okay, all of these things, and amazing interviews with super powerful people. So please, seriously, go check it out.
So we wanted to thank you so much for coming, and everybody who's listening, please listen to her podcast, Life Unfiltered, and check out all of her social media, Instagram and Twitter, which is at Alexa_Curtis.
To stay up to date on new episodes and a look behind the scenes, follow us at BBNC Pod on all social media, Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, even Pinterest when I'm bored. It's also a great place to contact us, let us know what you think, and give us topics you want to discuss. Finally, share our podcast with anyone you think may be interested. Thank you so much for listening. You're all shining stars.